Good evening for Telesur. I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. This is From the South. We begin with tonight's headlines. Former President Otto Perez Molina has resigned, paving the way for a new president in Guatemala. Protesters demonstrate their opposition to the government's decision to allow foreign companies to drill in Peru. Plus, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said that his country does not want to take in large numbers of Muslims in defense of Hungary's hardline response to refugees trying to enter the country. And good evening once again. Our top story, a story we've been covering all day, takes us to Guatemala, where the country has a new president after former President Otto Perez Molina has resigned. Alejandro Maldonado, who was only appointed vice president in May when his predecessor, Roxana Valdetti, was forced to resign over the same corruption case, has now been sworn in before Congress as the president there. Now, it is the first time in Guatemala's history that a vice president has taken over from a standing president. Maldonado is a conservative affiliated with the far-right political party, the National Liberation Movement, which had been accused of employing death squads against communists in the 1960s. And the new president was sworn in immediately after Guatemala's Congress formally accepted the resignation of President Otto Perez Molina in the midst of a corruption scandal that gutted his government and plunged the country into chaos days before this Sunday's presidential election. The 64-year-old retired general quit overnight, and Alejandro Maldonado will serve out the remaining months of Perez's term, which ends in January. And Perez Molina has appeared in court for a pre-trial hearing over the corruption allegations against him and was sent to preventative prison. A judge had issued a warrant for his arrest immediately after Congress stripped him of his immunity on Tuesday. The full trial process could take as long as a year. Meanwhile, Guatemalans gathered in front of the government palace to celebrate the president's resignation. Tens of thousands have been flooding the streets and demanding this for weeks. Although they expressed their satisfaction with the news that Perez Molina had finally gone, many also said that this was just a first step. At a White House briefing, spokesman Josh Earnest said the United States respects Perez Molina's decision to resign and commends the Guatemalan people for the manner in which they have dealt with the crisis.
The United States will continue to support Guatemala's democratic process, including peaceful general elections that are scheduled for September 6th. We also continue to support Guatemalan efforts to fight corruption and impunity in Guatemala, including the work done by the Public Ministry and the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala.
Now, one of the candidates running for president on Sunday is a former First Lady who divorced her husband to be allowed to run for presidency 4 years ago. Sandra Torres, then married to President Alvaro Colom, served as Guatemala's First Lady from 2008 to 2011. Now, after he ended his term, they got divorced to circumvent the constitutional ban on close relatives running for the presidency. However, that move backfired when a court ruled that her candidacy still violated the Constitution. Now she is running for presidency with the center-left National Unity of Hope Party. Surveys place her third behind frontrunners Manuel Valdizón and Jimmy Morales.
Look at what happened by voting for a party known as the Patriots Party. Look at what happened. Perez just lied. He deceived us. We can't commit this error again, friends. This September 6th, it is important to go out and vote for the National Unity of Hope.
And long before the present corruption scandal emerged, Otto Perez Molina was a controversial figure to many in Guatemala. His military background includes allegations of involvement in the massacres of the 1980s and apparent links to the CIA.
Otto Pérez Molina was elected president of Guatemala in 2011. He was born in 1950 and began his career in the Army in 1966. Later, he studied at the Inter-American Defense College in Washington and at the School of the Americas, which trained many officers accused of human rights abuses in Latin America. During Guatemala's civil war in the 1970s and 80s, Pérez Molina served in Guatemala's notorious special forces, also known as the Cabiles, in the indigenous Quiché region. U.S. embassy cables released by WikiLeaks refer to Pérez Molina's likely involvement in the massacres of Maya communities that left as many as 250,000 dead. The scorched earth operations involving the burning of dozens of village and mass rape were allegedly supported by the CIA and Israel. In the 1990s, Pérez Molina was head of the military intelligence. In that role, he has been accused of overseeing the torture and murder of guerrilla leader Efraín Bamaca, and later of involvement in the assassination of Bishop Juan José Gerardo, 2 days after he published a human rights report for the UN's Historical Clarification Commission. Also in the 1990s, Pérez Molina was accused of involvement in another corruption scandal known as the Red Moreno, which, like the present case, involved Guatemala's Customs Service. As president, Pérez Molina's position in favor of legalizing the drug trade has drawn disapproval from his former mentors in Washington. Some suggest that that may be one reason the U.S. administration has been backing the movement to oust him.
And now we're going to be joined by Alan Nairn, as a veteran investigative journalist who's currently there in Guatemala. Thanks so much for joining us, Alan, and taking the time for us. Now, former President Otto Pérez Molina is currently facing these charges related to a fairly recent corruption incident that we've been hearing about plenty, La Línea as it's called. However, there have been many other allegations leveled against him that go back for decades. I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about those other allegations that we haven't heard so much about recently.
Yes, and just one note, the U.S. was urging Pérez Molina not to resign. They were telling him not to resign. They said it would cause instability. They wanted to maintain the current order, but they weren't able to sustain that position because he was swept away by a democratic popular uprising. I met Pérez Molina in the Ixil in the mountains in September of 1982 when he was implementing the Rios Montt program of slaughter against the Mayan population, the program that got Rios Montt convicted of genocide. I interviewed Pérez Molina, who at that time was using the alias Major Tito, and I interviewed his troops as well as survivors of the massacres. And his troops described in detail how they would go into villages and slaughter civilians. They would make them dig their own mass graves. They would strangle them to death. They would come back and bomb them with U.S.-supplied helicopters. They would machine gun them from the air. All of this was under Pérez Molina's command. And then later, I reported in the Nation magazine that when he was head of GEDOS, the military intelligence service, in the 1990s, Pérez Molina received funds from the CIA. GEDOS functioned for decades as essentially a torture and assassination service. And in that capacity, Pérez Molina received the U.S. money, and the U.S. placed North American operatives working inside the GEDOS as they were carrying out these atrocities. At one point, the GEDOS even operated their own crematorium in the area of Huehuetenango so they could dispose of the bodies of their victims. And the targets were really anyone who was seen as a critic of the army, a critic of the rich, anyone who didn't comply. In fact, in 1968, the U.S. military attaché defined the targets as guerrillas or potential guerrillas. And a potential guerrilla is anyone who one thinks could potentially in the future have prohibited thoughts. And it was also used to justify the killing of children. During these sweeps, there was mass killing of children. Pregnant women were split open. And the children were referred to as delincuentes subversivos, subversive delinquents.
You were saying there that the U.S. was encouraging Pérez Molina not to resign. That's something I hadn't heard. I'm just wondering how we know that.
Well, I spoke to people who were involved in that. It was interesting, the U.S. position, because the U.S. is very close to CACIF, the Association of the Oligarchy, and they always worked together. In this case, they had a difference of opinion. CACIF felt Perez Molina had become too much of a burden. They wanted to ease him out. They felt he had lost control of the population. The U.S. felt it would be more destabilizing if he resigned. So they urged him to stay in. But of course, as the popular uprising just grew and grew, he had no choice. In fact, he was facing arrest this morning, and it was hours before that he resigned. And he has since been arrested, and he's now in prison.
All right, Mr. Alan Nairn, thanks so much for joining us to give us some insight on the situation there in Guatemala.
You're welcome.
And we go now, I believe, to Colombia. That's where President Juan Manuel Santos is still seeking international support in the border crisis with Venezuela. He visited Cucuta at the border with Venezuela, invited diplomats to visit the zone so that they could hear from actual Colombians being deported. Now, Santos held a public council of ministers attended by special guests such as ambassadors and representatives of international agencies. This after his call for a meeting of foreign ministers at the OAS had failed.
The Venezuelan government says that smuggling and the mafias that control it has generated a lot of problems, and it is possible that that may be true. That is the truth indeed, but it's the same for us, and we are most interested in harassing the smuggling gangs that really damage us.
A group of sellers of contraband gasoline in Colombia marched in the border city of Cucuta to demand that the government create job opportunities. Sellers of the contraband gasoline demanded a series of social and economic packages to help them, as they are no longer able to sell contraband gasoline smuggled from Venezuela. Now, they reiterated that the border crisis with Venezuela was a fault of the Colombian government.
We know that the gasoline is contraband, but we do it because we can. We do it because our families need it. We need water, electricity. What else can we do but rob? We need a way to take care of our families.
We are really desperate. This is a critical moment for us because we need to take care of our families and put our children through school.
Protesters lit fires in the streets of the Loreto in the north of Peru, decrying the government's decision to give a Canadian company license to extract oil from one of the country's largest reserves. The demonstrators are calling for the government to repeal the deal with Pacific Exploration and Production Corporation, returning control of oil block 192 to Petroperú, the state-owned oil company. Now, the Peruvian Congress will debate the issue later on in the day. For more on this issue, we turn to our correspondent, Raul Mora. He has this report.
In the early hours of Wednesday, a general strike with closed roads, ports, and businesses was started in Loreto, which is the largest territorial region of Peru. The measure was implemented to protest the concession of the oil field called Lot 192 to a transnational corporation instead of having state company Petroperú profit from such investment.
I believe this is a powerful response to the situation of Loreto, because it cannot be allowed that Congress people do not listen to the demands of Loreto. Our region has endured the aggressions of the state and centralism, and there is no way that can be permitted.
Lot 192 is the country's richest oil field, which produces 13,000 barrels a day. It has certified reserves for 20 years and estimated profits of $40 million a year. However, the government has refused to invest there.
In Peru, unfortunately, ideological interests dominate. Those ideological interests are oriented so that the state does not have any participation in the energy sector, and therefore the state oil company does not have any role. In addition, concepts such as energy security and sovereignty are not in the repertoire of the neoliberal economic system that is governing us.
The people of Loreto have also been marching through the month of August to protest the privatization of Lot 192. The strike will last for 48 hours, but organizers claim it can be expanded if authorities refuse to take their demands under consideration. Rael Mora, Telesur, Peru.
And coming up, the father of the now famous drowned Syrian boys is about to take his son's bodies home. That very sad story when we come back after the break.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets. Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people. Compelling personal stories and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today. With Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open File, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Crime rates across the United States have risen sharply this year, and the country's capital, Washington, D.C., has been one of the areas hardest hit. But there are differences of opinion about what might be the causes in this spike. Bianca Perez now reports.
So far this year, Washington, D.C. has seen an increase of 45% in the murder rate compared to the same period in 2014. Police officers worry that their lack of manpower is a key factor in this increase.
I don't want anyone getting killed. Not in Washington, D.C., not nowhere across the universe. But we kind of know that's somewhat impossible. So in order for this to be carried out to the best, we need to have all the resources. We need to make sure that we have the proper staffing. Right now, I feel like we are understaffed.
105 citizens were murdered in the city up to the end of August, many of them in metro stations like this. In response, Mayor Muriel Bowser has proposed putting more police officers on the streets.
That is blatantly.
Social activists counter that police behavior is part of the problem, while the roots of the problem are not being addressed.
Having more police is not the answer. A lot of those are abusive of their powers. We've seen how jump outs have been abusive of power and violating people's rights and murderous in results. That is not a panacea for violence in our community. This is a social problem, not a criminal problem.
Law enforcement officials say the causes of the surge in crime are the acquisition of illegal guns and increasing use of synthetic drugs and repeat violent offenders on the streets. However, many feel that poverty and unemployment are the true causes.
Well, I think it's time for us to take a look at the root causes of violence, and that is poverty is the worst form of violence. We have the greatest disparity in wealth in the nation here in D.C., and this nation has the greatest disparity in wealth in the world, so we need to take a look at that.
The recent increase in crime has not only affected the U.S. Capitol. 35 other cities have seen an average 24% increase in their homicide rates compared to last year. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been in the spotlight of late as his administration has adopted an aggressive stance against refugees. Now, Orban is saying that he would consider such a quota redistribution system if an offer were made. EU nations have been harping over exactly how refugees would be distributed across the region as more and more flood in from the poor and war-torn Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The Hungarian Prime Minister still holds to his belief, however, that a quota system would encourage more refugees to travel to Europe.
We believe that all countries have the right to decide if they want to live together with populous Muslim communities. It is their right to decide, and if the decision is that they don't want that, then they will live together. But we don't want that, and in my view, we have the right not to want to live together with populous Muslim communities. This is our policy. We think that we don't want that. We do not like what stemmed from that in Western European countries. Perhaps those who did it liked it, but we don't like it.
Meanwhile, Macedonian authorities have allowed refugees to enter from Greece to avoid clashes at the border. This comes after migrants stormed the border on Wednesday evening. Around 3,000 refugees have been transported by train to the northern border with Serbia. However, their journey will most likely be blocked in Hungary before entering the Schengen zone. This week, nothing has grasped the attention of human rights bodies and the international community more than the image of a young Syrian boy whose body washed up on the shores of a Greek beach. The imagery has gone viral around the internet and across the world. Now the father of the young boy, whose brother and mother also died while attempting to reach the Greek island of Kos, is preparing to return his dead family to their home of Kobani. The father, Abdullah Kurdi, said he had paid smugglers to transport his entire family to Greece. In all, 12 people died in the same capsized boat.
I remember that we left for the boat. The smuggler took me to that point after an hour approximately, to a Turkish man. He put us in a boat, 12 people. The boat became heavy. With the man leading it, we became 13. We sailed in the sea for approximately 45 minutes. The man steered the boat, saw that the sea is high, the wave was high. We were hit by the first wave and he escaped. He jumped into the water and escaped away. I tried to take over the steering, but we were hit by another wave. The boat capsized. I grabbed my children and my wife. They died.
Syria and its allies continue to seek a political solution to the crisis in the country. The Iranian Assistant Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs has arrived in Damascus now to discuss the latest developments.
In a joint press conference with the Syrian Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal Miqdad, the Iranian Assistant Foreign Minister for African Affairs Hussein Amir Abdullahian stressed that any successful project to find a solution to the crisis in Syria must take into account the central role of the Syrian people. He said that Iran will continue to provide support and backing to Syria, adding that Tehran and Moscow have a stable and well-established position in supporting of Syria.
Iran appreciates and highly values the pivotal and central role of President Bashar al-Assad in defending the national unity of Syria and fighting against terrorism, as well as his wisdom in ensuring that Syria can solve the multiple crises that have crippled the country in recent years.
At the same time, Russia's permanent representative at the United Nations, Vitaly Churkin, said that Moscow would not join the international alliance against the ISIS terrorists led by Washington. He pointed out that the alliance had bombed Syrian territory without the approval of the Syrian government or the UN Security Council. Churkin said that Russia considers fighting the terrorists a clear priority, but only in line with Security Council resolutions and respect for the sovereignty of states.
Russia wants to tell the world that it is no longer possible to do something outside the framework of international law. So we Syrians believe in the role of Russia and Iran, and we think that any initiative that falls under the umbrella of international law will lead to positive results, not only for Syria, but for the whole region. This is especially true now because the crisis in Syria has come to look more and more like an international settling of accounts.
The Syrian people are watching carefully the many variables in these political developments. After 5 years suffering the daily consequences of the crisis, they look for any glimmer of hope that might bring an end to this seemingly endless war. Hazem Abdullah, Telesur, Syria.
And now a brief of some of the other stories making headlines across the globe.
In Yemen's city of Aden, forces loyal to the exiled government of President Hadi inaugurated military and security facilities there after 5 months of closure. The port city was the scene of months of intense fighting between troops loyal to the exiled president and Shiite rebels who overran it in March. A Sunni extremist blew himself up inside a Shiite mosque and a car bomb was detonated outside shortly thereafter in the Yemeni capital Sana'a. Updated figures by authorities say the blast killed 32 people and wounded 92. This is the latest attack on Shiite targets by Sunni rebels. Russia's Gazprom and its Chinese partner, the China National Petroleum Corporation, both signed a memorandum on gas supplies. Gas will be delivered from Russia's Far East to China through a new gas pipeline. This happened during President Vladimir Putin's visit to Beijing. In France, angry farmers blocked the streets of Paris with over 1,500 tractors to protest plunging food prices and soaring costs. They say that this is killing their livelihoods. The protest came after months of similar acts around the country that prompted the government to offer a fresh set of measures to address the farmers' concerns. Chad's president has been accused of genocide, war crimes, and torture. Charges were filed against President Idriss Déby in a Senegalese court. However, legal experts said the court's founding statute appeared to bar it from taking any action against the president. Kim Davis, the county clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples on religious grounds, was found in contempt of court by a United States federal judge. After the hearing, the judge said that her good faith belief is simply not a viable defense. She was then taken into custody.
A museum devoted to the mafia located in Las Vegas opened an exhibit on FIFA's corruption earlier this week. Now, the permanent display debuted at the Mob Museum and follows the corruption scandal that created the worst crisis of FIFA's history. Now, according to a museum representative, the display, quote, provides an incisive and eye-opening look into the rampant corruption that plagues FIFA, end quote. Now we head to Brazil, which is the location of the largest outdoor museum in Latin America. In the Irantem Museum, 5,000 different plants as well as works by 200 international artists are on display in the heart of the mining region of Brazil. The museum remains a driving force for the local economy there as it employs about 800 people and puts in art and educational events for the public. Finally, this evening, the Hollywood film called Spotlight and starring Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, and Rachel McAdams premiered at the Venice Film Festival. The film tells the story of the reporters who worked on the Boston Globe's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation of pedophile Roman Catholic priests. The reporters exposed that the abuses occurred for decades and was covered up by the Roman Catholic Church. That's what we're covering on this Thursday evening here from Caracas. We have plenty more on those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For all of us here in Caracas and our news team in Quito, Ecuador, for Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. We'll see you back here tomorrow.